acids, we need cholesterol, but all that has to get into our body somehow. And that somehow is called assimilation. So once that is in our body, the next step is transportation. So what is the purpose of blood pressure? The whole purpose of blood pressure is to transport nutrients and eliminate waste. So that really is critical, because when we're looking at any type of movement in our body, everything has to be water soluble. That's how it's going to easily flow throughout our body. So if you look at gas, such as oxygen, that needs to bind to the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. Now, for people that have higher blood pressure, which means that their heart is going at a quicker rate to deliver nutrients, or it's having an issue with potentially eliminating waste. Either way, the transportation needs to be addressed. Now, in order for us to make sure that we are transporting, what do we need is a sound structure. So structure is what helps with regulation of the blood pressure. So that's when we look at the vessels. The vessels are supposed to tighten based on the needs of our body, and then relax again based on the needs of our body. So the pressure will always keep adjusting based on what our demands are. So if you're driving along and somebody cuts you off, well, that demand will all of a sudden be higher because your body's under stress. So now, to support that structure, what we need to make sure is our structural what we need to make sure is our defense and repair is going to be there. So our body's constantly breaking down and rebuilding. That is completely normal. And we always have these foreign invaders that are constantly trying to get into our cells. So in order to combat that, this is why we have now something called our immune function. Now, with our immune function, though, what sustains all of this is energy. Our mitochondria are my favorite little cells in our body. The mitochondria are hard at work constantly at making energy. At the same time, free radicals tend to be formed. Now, mitochondria is what's critical when it comes to nutrition, especially for Fabry, because energy is such an issue. If energy is an issue, then we need to make sure that our mitochondria is going to be nourished. And at the very end, we're going to talk about different foods that will help hopefully nourish our body. Now, while this is all happening, all these structural function, like blood pressure is going on, our immune system is being activated, all that will often create toxins in our body. So biotransformation elimination is the next step. Our liver, our gut, our kidney, our microbiome are constantly hard at work. So if you look at our organs of elimination, our colon, kidney, and our skin are our largest organs of elimination, especially the skin. So whatever you put on your skin is going to be affected internally, but we sometimes don't realize that. So you look at the cosmetic industry, look at creams and lotions and potions that often we are exposed to or that we actually apply on our bodies. All that is going to dictate how our gut bacteria and microbiome is going to handle itself. So there are microbes all over us. So when your body is healthy, you have a powerful army that defends you against invading bugs and foreign particles, so viruses, bacteria, and parasites, all that. So our army is the immune system, and this is what polices your gut and the bloodstream for whatever is foreign. Now, the gut being our largest immune system, we have to often and wonder what we're exposed to in our environment. So when it comes to the sheets that you sleep on, right now it's lovely snow in Vancouver, which is very rare for us. I'm sure you Ontario people, this is normal, but in BC this is not so normal. So all of these environmental factors will also have a huge role to play on our gut and our microbiome. So when you look at this now, this picture is a little bit confusing, only because if you look at the different parts of our gut, you will see all the different parts in which colony of bacteria will, what certain bacteria is important for certain parts of the actual gut. So our gut is populated by a complex community of microbial partners that are far more numerous than the cells of the intestine itself. So when something like this goes array, I'm sure we've all heard the term called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis essentially is really a fancy way of saying miscommunication. So often what we find when working with autoimmune inflammatory things going on in for people is that they're having a pathogenic inflammatory response to a non-pathogenic microbe, which means that a gut that should normally be able to handle a particular pathogen that we're exposed to is now no longer able to handle that pathogen. So hence we get a miscommunication in the gut. And that's how we come to the term of dysbiosis. Now, there's other warning signs also that will give you an indication if there's something actually going on into the gut. One of them actually being the loss of focus and mental clarity, lack of ability to relax and sleep, feelings tired, or let's say your tolerance for stupidity and honesty goes down. When you notice things such as that should be, not necessarily an alarm bell, but something to ask yourself. So what is going on with me? What am I eating or not eating that is affecting me negatively? So chronic IBS-like symptoms, you can think of it like this. Bacteria fermentation means that the gut bacteria are feasting. But the question I ask is, what are they feasting on? And that is our food. Before we get a chance to absorb the nutrition from it, when we eat our food, they too have waste products. So when the bacteria eat our food, they also have waste products. So some of the waste products are relatively benign, like hydrogen gas. Some bacteria produce more hydrogen gas than others, but some of the bacteria metabolic waste products, such as something called lipocholic acid, that is highly toxic and damaging to the tissue in the small intestine, to the microvilli, which is the little hairs, and the cells in our gut called the enterocytes. That's the lining of the villi. So the microvilli, where all the nutrients from our food are supposed to be absorbed, when they get damaged, we actually will absorb less nutrition from our food. It's that simple. So not only do the bacteria eat the nutrition from our food, the tissue damage that occurs makes sure that we absorb less too. So that's like a really mouthful of trying to figure out how the chronic IBS symptoms even show up. So if we have questions on that, by all means, ask away. Now, when you look at, so the immune system and our antibodies against, so basically our gut is our immune function. What that means that then an error often will occur. When there's an error that occurs in our gut, our body will think our own cells are foreign. And that's how we end up with an autoimmune issue in our body. So autoimmune you can look at as a chronic inflammation, tissue destruction. When that happens, you typically have a loss of functioning. So what that means is for gut, for example, you may experience something like constipation or diarrhea or both. Or sometimes, anytime you eat sometimes you can experience cramping or bloating and not sure why that's actually happening. So that is a loss of function that is going on in the body. So this is a fun little picture to look at. So if you look on the left side, you will see shag carpeting. So the epithelial cells that form the lining of the gut have finger-like projections. That's called villi. That's supposed to increase the surface area for transporting nutrients into the body. But when the gut is inflamed, as often the case with dysbiosis, these villi can actually become truncated, and that's what you see on the right side of the screen there. So that will result, when you have a flat area like that in the gut, that means you're not going to have the nutrient absorption. So that includes nutrients such as iodine, selenium. Those are just two examples that are critical for thyroid health. Hopefully this makes sense. Now, if you look at the next slide there, now referring to the previous slide, when you see the right side of the screen where the carpeting is now flat, essentially, the gut wall, that is the lining of the intestines. That's made up of a single layer of tiny cells which allow nutrients and water while keeping bacteria, large proteins, and other toxins out. So you can think of the gut wall as the bouncer of the body, giving access only to those worthy of entry while keeping the troublemakers and the bad guys away. So nobody really likes to think about that, but when the intestines are a pretty toxic place, we can ingest toxins on a daily basis, from either the margaritas we sometimes tend to sip or to the very air that we breathe, which is why a healthy gut wall is critical to maintaining a strong immune function and overall good health. So Mother Nature thought of this when she placed about 70% of our immune system in and around the gut wall. So the scientific name for leaky gut is called intestinal hyperpermeability. That essentially you can translate that to an excessively permeable intestinal lining. That means it's essentially leaking. So things that we should be able to absorb, like B12 or any of the other water soluble nutrients, will actually not be able to be absorbed at all. So all the bad guys can flood in and just simply cause a complete ruckus in our gut. And so ultimately what happens is unwanted toxins will crash our immune system, and the body shuts down with inflammation. Now, over the long term though, the immune system can become overwhelmed, and that can allow the toxins to sneak into the bloodstream and actually troll our systemic circulation. And that's called a process called translocation, where these toxins can literally travel to anywhere. So there's a lot of new research outside that's been going on right now, stating simply that these toxins from the microbiome are what is implicated in so things such as autism and other different mental health invaders right now. So this is kind of like a fun picture to look at. Your stomach literally is leaky. That's exactly what's going on. So after all that, now what the heck do we do now? So one of the key topics that I always like to talk about is the food aspect. So, having seen all this, and yes, fine, we're experiencing what we're experiencing, but what can we actually do about it? So one of the first places I like to start out with people's diet is looking at how much fiber they're actually eating. So your gut bacteria ferments fiber and produces short chain fatty acids. So fermentable fiber is what you really want to focus on. Short chain fatty acids have been shown to inhibit enzymes that are closely related to epigenetic regulation. So in other words, they will help determine whether a gene is expressed or not. So short chain fatty acid mediated inhibition of these enzymes increases expression. So things like cassava or sweet potatoes. My grandmother actually used to say you have to have at least 3 sweet potatoes a week. So needless to say, sweet potatoes in my house is a pretty standard thing here. Plantains actually contain a beautiful prebiotic. So plantains you can pan fry and put them on the side of any dish that you're actually having. So whether you're making salmon or chicken, or if you're vegetarian, any vegetarian meal, and you put plantains on the side, that's a wonderful prebiotic for your gut to actually absorb. Now, fermented foods are really talked about a lot, especially I'm sure we've all heard of kombucha and kefir and all these fun things that are now in the grocery store that have actually been around for a long time. So the lactic acid bacteria is what was found in fermented vegetables. So every culture has their own fermented food. Korean people often will have the kimchi. There's sauerkraut. There's dairy is also, some of the dairy products is also fermented. A note on kombucha, though, I will say this, though, kombucha, as delicious as it is, you do want to be mindful of how much kombucha you'll actually drink. Kombucha, because of the way it is fermented, there is still alcohol in it. So I have seen people where they have consumed, a couple of bottles a day, where I've seen liver enzymes actually go up. So yes, kombucha is good for you, just in smaller quantities. So limit it to about 1 to 3 ounces per day, and I would limit it at that. But sauerkraut and kimchi, like these other fermented foods, though, you can really have that every single day, and that will not negatively affect your liver function. The next one that's often asked, I get asked about, is actually gluten. So before grains even were around, we actually ate a gluten-free diet. That was actually the normal way to eat. But unfortunately now the gluten has, the grains themselves have actually changed from what they are now from what they used to be. Now, if you look at things such as anemia, osteoporosis, any type of joint pain, dermatitis or pediformis, any neurological issues, nausea, vomiting, stomach aches, bloating, all of these things can be implicated to not necessarily gluten per se, but the grain that somebody's actually having. So gluten itself, it really means glue. That when you make oatmeal, for instance, that gummy consistency of oatmeal, that's glue. And for some people, that it can really trigger an immune overreaction. And that's how oftentimes we tend to overeat a little bit. It can actually also increase appetite. But you have to be careful with gluten, because nowadays gluten has become this popular thing. And now everywhere you look, it's gluten-free here and gluten-free bakeries and gluten-free everything. The problem is when gluten was taken away and now it's become this mass media, mass marketing, and a popular thing to do now is, oh, I'm gluten-free and I don't have celiac disease. The thing you have to be careful is when gluten was taken out, what is it actually being replaced with? So if you look at these bakeries and what have that are out there, one of the problems is gluten is replaced with xanthan gum, cornstarch, rice starch, a ton of sugar typically, all types of different types of sugar. So you do want to be mindful. If you are going to take away gluten, that doesn't mean that you can replace it with gluten-free, healthy foods. You do need to be mindful of what it is that you're replacing that with. So one of the things I will often suggest is when you're first doing this, try to get rid of potentially grains, especially if you have a thyroid issue. Get rid of grains, one meal only. Don't do all of a sudden go cold turkey and this is what we're going to do now. No, go with one meal at a time to make this a lot easier for you. So for instance, in the evening meal, but that is tends to be the little bit harder one because people tend to eat dinner more than what dinners tend to be larger than, let's say, breakfast or with lunch. Keep the dinner the lightest. Get rid of the grain at dinner time so that when you sleep at night, inflammation is going to be a lot less. So for instance, if you want to replace rice, you can replace it with, let's say, sweet potatoes or any type of root vegetable, like any type of squashes would be all great to try and replace that with. Dairy is, of course, a love-hate relationship with this one, don't we all? So dairy is actually quite interesting because our bovine now is very different from our bovine, let's say, from back in the 1900s. If you look at what changes that cows have actually gone through, dairy itself does contain casein. When you compare that casein to human breast milk, it's 7 times higher in cows than it is in humans. And the reason for that is it was meant to, I mean, it's natural. Of course it is. It's meant for a, 750-pound mammal. That's what the dairy is meant for. It's really not, never really was not meant for humans to actually consume it. And the amount that we consume also tends to be a lot excess than what it would be okay. So modern milk production has increased exposure to the opiate-like qualities, which is interesting because dairy, when research has been done on dairy, if anybody has ever looked at any of this, you will actually read that the addictive profile of dairy is by far similar to that of morphine and heroin, unfortunately. So for instance, when I ask people to maybe potentially stop eating cheese, I get looked at like I have 2 heads. What do you mean I can't eat cheese anymore? It's not the cheese that's a problem. The problem is the casein. And if your gut is having any type of dysbiosis going on, any type of miscommunication that's going on, that's something we really do need to be mindful of. Because when you look at the dairy itself, if you've ever seen a breastfeeding mom, the milk actually should be normally a yellowish in color. If you look at even organic cow milk, it's all white. And nobody really ever questions that. So milk itself has to be homogenized here in Canada. And then on that note, when it's homogenized, all of the nutrients have been stripped from it. So when that happens, vitamin A and D and all the nutrients actually have to be added into it. And then it needs to be bleached for the white color. And that is normal. That is including even organic dairy. But then I'm always asked the question, well, where do I get my calcium from then? Well, calcium you can actually get from all your green veggies: bok choy, broccoli, spinach, sweet potatoes. No wonder my grandmother always wanted sweet potatoes, but sweet potatoes is also a great source of calcium. And salmon with the bones in it, especially the canned salmon, sardines, almonds are great for all your nuts, and seeds are great. Tahini, if anybody ever has hummus, that's what tahini is, sesame seed paste. A tablespoon of that gives you your dose of calcium for the day. It's a very, very good source of calcium. Our next one is good old sugar. You tell me who doesn't like sugar. Sugar, unfortunately, though, is something that, yes, our body requires it and we need it for the energy source, but insulin is something that we really have to be mindful of. Because whenever we eat any type of fruit, let's say, or any type of sugar we're exposed to, our insulin will go through the roof. If insulin goes to the roof, what ends up happening is our stress goes up in our body. When stress goes up in our body, we now have cortisol as well as insulin. Now, they both are catabolic hormones, which means muscle breakdown hormone. When muscle is breaking down, what's going to happen is that we are going to feel that much more tired later. So fruit is another one. So fruit is as much as it's natural sugar, yes. But if we're diabetic or if we're having any type of sugar instability in our body, that is something to be very mindful of, is to limit the amount of fruit that you actually have. So oftentimes I'm told, oh, I have lots of fruits and vegetables, but really it's I have lots of fruits and maybe a vegetable here and there. What I would suggest typically is try to snack on vegetables and limit your fruit to maybe 1 to 2 servings per day. So a serving would be, let's say, 1 cup of berries or 1 apple or 1 grapefruit. Some people don't really count grapefruit as a fruit because they think it's too sour, but it does count. It actually helps support your liver function as well. Now, insulin's cousin is leptin. Now, when we have an instability in our sugar in our body, and let's say after we eat a meal, and how often do some of us want something sweet after the meal? When you're craving a sugary thing after you've already had your meal, that's telling you that that leptin is not increasing. The leptin has to increase because that's what gives us our satiety. If our leptin is not there, that means the satiety will also be blunted. And so our propensity to overeat then quickens. Hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have questions, please ask. And then fat. Now, back in the day, we were told, oh my gosh, you have to have low fat and then high fat and then no fat. It's all over the map. So really you want to look at is what is your body needing? Now, genetically, you have to figure out which APOE genetic carrier you are of, because some people, yes, low fat is the way to go for them. But for some people, they absolutely require higher fat. So really you want to figure that out for you as an individual person, but do not be shy of fat because your fat is still required for hormone function of the body, especially for women. Now for women, that's going to be critical when it comes to pregnancy or postmenopausal years, either depending on which stage of life that you're at will determine how much fat will really be required for you. So lots of healthy nuts and seeds are great sources of fat. Same with avocados. Avocados I'm a big proponent of because that fat is actually what you need for your brain function. Now, supplements is something that I get asked a lot about as well. Now, how much protein does one have? How much vitamin D? How many which Bs? Probiotics, glutamine? I'm happy to answer whatever questions, but for Fabry specifically, you want to have vitamin D anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 units per day. But the other thing also with vitamin D is you do want to make sure that it has K2 in it, because vitamin D itself is a fat-soluble nutrient, which means that it needs a fat in order to get into the cells. Now, K2 is the carrier. In order to help support the bones and brain health, you need the K2 attached to the vitamin D. So on your vitamin, on your bottle of D, just make sure that K2 is actually added into it. And the rest of the supplements, I'm happy to answer whatever specific questions anybody has for me. Julia? Are you there, Julia?
Thanks, Seema. That was great.
So you guys can ask whatever questions you have. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, so just if you want to write them in the chat box, and then we can take a look and we can answer some of them. Seema, I have one for you right now.
Yeah.
Fabry specialists have recommended and suggested taking or trying out the FODMAP diet.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about this and what that means for us?
Absolutely. So have you experienced the FODMAP diet yet then, or have you tried it out yourself or no?
No.
No. Okay. So FODMAP itself. Sorry, can you still see me? I think I'm
yes.
losing you here.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay. For some reason, Are you there still?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I for some reason lost you for a second. Okay. Sorry. So for FODMAP, so there's a whole host of different types of diets out there. There's a specific carbohydrate, the STD diet. There's SIBO diet out there. There's the GAPS. So all these are all encompassed within each other. FODMAP specifically, though, means fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So this FODMAP is excellent, has seen a lot of success rates for IBS and IBD and other GI conditions with similar symptoms, because the FODMAP specifically, though, it will allow grains, fiber, sugar, and other fermentable carbs that may be slightly adapted for somebody, let's say with SIBO. So SIBO is small intestine bacterial overgrowth. The FODMAPs, however, can be a little bit restrictive. So there is some great books out there. There's great resources, information out there for following a FODMAP diet. But what often is the case is things with high FODMAP is what the goal is not to have. So things such as soy milk or cows or goats milk, yogurt, ice cream, but yet you can still have, for some people that are not sensitive to that, they can still do the rice or coconut or almond milk. Typically, the FODMAP lifts, you can do some grains. There are some, I just find sometimes for some people this is quite restrictive. So if you're someone that has a trouble following certain dietary things, what I often suggest is to start with one of the food groups and not all of and to try not to do the whole thing all at once. But do you have specific questions about the FODMAP itself?
No, I don't think so. I think just kind of understanding more about what it means is great. Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, if you look at in order to follow the FODMAP diet, there is a great website online. It's called the SIBOinfo.com. That is the resource that I often will use for myself, but I also send patients to. And depending on what your gut is actually doing, for some people, you do want to be checked for where the discrepancy is in the body. So if you do have, let's say, more hydrogen-producing bacteria or methane-producing bacteria, that will determine which diet you would fall into, whether that be the SCD, the specific carbohydrate, whether that be the SIBO diet, whether that be the FODMAP diet. But as a general whole, if for Fabry patients to try a FODMAP diet for a short term, that's actually a great thing to do because it really can help reset the microbiome. It can help reset the gut.
Okay.
As long as it's not too restrictive. I find some of the children have a tougher time following it, but otherwise with the proper meal plans and all that, it can be fairly straightforward to follow.
Okay. We have another question here. Someone asked, can you recommend a specific brand of vitamin D with K2? I have not been able to find one that has K2 in it.
Yeah, there are a few out there. So, I mean, I'm not attached to any company. I'll just say that right off the bat. The one that I personally use for my own self and my family is the Thorne brand of vitamin D K2. And that's actually available on Amazon. You can just go to Amazon and get it. It is a liquid. I do prefer liquid due to the absorption. With a lot of Fabry patients, they have a tougher time absorbing nutrients because of either diarrhea or constipation. There's something going on with the gut with absorption. So I like the liquid Thorne, but it says right on there D with K2. Now the catch with vitamin D also is it is best taken in the morning, then because vitamin D has an inverse relationship with melatonin. So if you have troubles with sleep at all, vitamin D is best taken in the AM with breakfast, and it should be with food because of the fat soluble content of it. So try not to take vitamin D K2 at night. Better take in the morning.
Okay, next question. I have been doing some research on the enzyme we are missing in Fabry disease. The enzyme we are missing is the one responsible for breaking down carbs and vegetables like broccoli.
Yes.
I've been trying to follow a low-carb diet, and my gut is so much better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because when you look at certain carbohydrates, they contain, so broccoli, for instance, contains a molecule called sulforaphane. Now, not everybody can break down sulforaphane. To look at the brassica vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kohlrabi, all of those, that sulforaphane can be really difficult to break down. And if Fabry patients, you already have an enzyme that's already missing to break down that sulforaphane itself, then the absorption is not going to be there. So one way around this, if you still like broccoli and you want to eat, things such as these types of vegetables, is actually taking a digestive enzyme with it and see if that helps. For some of my Fabry patients, that has been really helpful in taking something like a digestive enzyme to help the pancreas and the duodenum actually secrete the right acids that you actually need to break this down.
Interesting, and great question. Yeah, that was a really good question. A digestive enzyme, anything specific? Like anyone that you like?
An animal-based specifically would be better, only because the hydrochloric acid that's in there, it will help you actually metabolize and break that down.
Okay. Okay. Next question is, what are your thoughts on Skyr Icelandic yogurt versus regular yogurt?
Now, the dairy aisle at the grocery store used to be very simple, and now it's not so much. So, okay, so I'll start with Greek yogurt, only because Greek yogurt is, it's the thick, it's the creamy, and it's a whole, trend that we're in. I mean, the Icelandic yogurt from the Nordic island is actually giving Greek, I find, a run for its money. But it is actually the same way it's actually made the same way that Greek yogurt is made, which is why I started with the Greek. But it's strained just a bit more, and that results in a more stickiness. And so it actually has more protein in it. And it is traditionally made with non-fat yogurt. It is. I find that Icelandic yogurt, some people actually tend to tolerate a lot better than regular yogurt. So I'm all good with it. If your body can actually handle dairy, it's a great. So try to get the organic version, though, of course, of it, to avoid any toxins and stuff. But I think it's a great source. I do prefer it over Greek yogurt.
Okay.
It's made very similarly.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions for Seema, for Dr. Kanwal today?
There's something that you had asked me, I thought, yesterday. There's something that I thought you wanted to ask me about.
I think it was just the FODMAP diet and vitamin D.
Okay.
Just how much, I think. Yeah, that was it.
I'll go back to that FODMAP too for just a quick second. So one of the testing that people can actually do is something called a SIBO test. And to actually test for that SIBO, if it actually is in your system or not. And the way the SIBO test actually works is it's a breath test. So it's actually really simple to do at home, and you can order it online yourself. Now, if it comes back as positive, so it is, the SIBO test itself is confirmed through lactulose breath test. And that lactulose will measure hydrogen and methane gas in the breath that is produced. So for someone to follow a FODMAP diet and that you're actually feeling better, like the one person that said that they were feeling better doing a low carb diet, I would almost question what is going on in the gut. Like if that person actually he or she has a certain bacteria that's actually proliferating, that might be worth your while to make sure. That's great that you're following that, but also make sure that you don't have any critters living in there that you actually need to get rid of, either through antibiotics or through certain different types of herbs that act as antibiotics as well. So that's something just to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Just to go back to the FODMAP, so can you spell out the website that was recommended regarding FODMAP?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's SIBO Info. So www.siboinfo.com. Okay. It's one of our colleagues in the States, actually. She has Dr. Alison Seibecker. That's her website that's open for everybody. And in it, she actually lists all the fermentable carbohydrates and the sources of fermentable carbohydrates and, the differences and and certain treatments actually involved. So we do all this testing and stuff in our office as well.
Great. Okay. And is there any other recommended foods or cooking methods?
Cooking methods?
Maybe.
I don't know about you guys out there, but in Vancouver here, everyone's all on this Instant Pot thing. So Instant Pot is a great, easy way of cooking because it doesn't take a lot of effort in it at all. But roasting in the oven is always nice and easy.
Okay. And I remember at one of our meetings, you just mentioned broccoli, for example, but the moment to not overcook the vegetables, so the moment they turn.
That's right. So any type of brassica vegetable. So if you, so what I mean by that is here, I'm going to give you an example here right now. So any type of brassica vegetables, they all contain these amazing cancer protecting chemicals called sulforaphane. But the trick is you want to make sure when you cook them, you don't overcook them. So if broccoli, for instance, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all these, for instance, it's best when you are cooking, when you're steaming broccoli, the minute that you see it changes color, that's when you stop it. And as soon as it switched color on you, you know that that's when sulforaphane is now activated, and that's the phytochemical that will actually provides a health benefit in our body. Okay. That is, it's a sulfur-containing phytochemical.
And what about cooking? You know, like what we are actually cooking it in, as far as frying pans and that type of thing. Is there safer ones and non-safer ones? Well,
you want to avoid aluminum, absolutely. But steaming something would be fine. Popping it in the oven on parchment paper is great. Try not to cook on foil. Oftentimes people will put something like foil in the oven. Foil will contain the aluminum, and you do want to avoid that altogether. And the non-sticking pans, you need to be mindful of those, that if you don't, non-stick pans, you cannot overheat them. But honestly, the best thing I would find is the cast iron. Cast iron is probably the best thing, and you don't go wrong with the cast iron, unless, now here's a caveat, of course, unless you do have very, very high sky high ferritin levels, so it means iron stores, then you do not use it.
Okay, we have another question. So can any doctor do tests to find out if you have gut bacteria?
No, not any doctor. You do have to be specifically trained in this types of stuff, but you need to ask the physician that you're working with that whether they do testing for SIBO or what have you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and I'll give everyone
depends on the interest really of the doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody? We'll give you another minute or so. Anything else you're pressing to ask Dr. Kanwal?
One fun way I find of using brassica vegetables. So when I say brassica, I mean things like kale, which unfortunately now is a superfood. It's a hot food. It's a popular food item there. But kale, cauliflower, there's Brussels sprouts, broccoli, kohlrabi, turnips, collard greens, mustard greens, cabbage, any of those types of foods. What you can do is actually bake them in the oven with simply olive oil, salt, and pepper, and that's it. Call it a day. And you don't need to bake it in the oven for very long. It's actually, if you leave it for about 15 to 20 minutes max, and it still maintains its crunch, but then you've activated the sulforaphane. So easy way to help incorporate it into your daily routine or weekly routine.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I think that's great. I think that we we want to keep it to before 8 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining us, Seema. And it was great. Thank you for all of the participants. Again, sorry that it was a little tough to get started here, but again, this is what we're going to be using moving forward. So we'll hope that it's kind of smooth sailing from here. And if anyone has yet to get their Be Rare Be You tattoo, you can find it on our Canadian Fabric Association website. Where the goal is to try to get as many people worldwide to wear the tattoos. They're just about this big for Rare Disease Day on February 28th. So if you order probably by the end of tomorrow, you'll get it before Rare Disease Day on February 28th. And any meetings that we have coming up, we'll make sure to have them there as well. So again, Dr. Kanwal, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Julia, and everybody who joined us today.
Okay, and everyone have a great night. Thank you.